Salam, Sobaher, Chitoraste, Khubaste, Nanum Sahipu Khaimast. For those of you who don't speak Dari, what I just said was, hello, good afternoon, how are you? Are you good? My name is Mr. Buhan. Welcome to Mr. B Presents. Today we're going to talk about my time in Afghanistan as part of an AFPAK, as an AFPAK hand on an advisory team. Now your first question is, well, what's an AFPAK hand? Well, first off, AFPAK is short for Afghanistan, Pakistan, which is the region that we are experts in, theoretically. And hand is a person who's got some training, they've got the cultural background, they know more about the area. They're not from that region, but they know about it, and they're there to help people from their country to learn the culture as they try to interact with them. With that being said, how do you get that? Well, to be an AFPAK hand, we do a lot of training. We got a lot of training on culture. And a lot of culture is the history. It's the religions, so that's where I learned a lot about Islam itself. It is knowing how to talk to people. And that's where they spent a lot of time we spent 4 months, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day in a classroom with just 3 or 4 students, grand total, and an instructor, and we'd switch out for different instructors along the way, so we'd learn different people's ways of talking and teaching. So that gave me my background to get to Afghanistan. And then in 2014, I went to Afghanistan to be an AFPAK hand. And I was assigned to the Civil Military Operations Cell. But at that point in time, we're starting to slow down what NATO and the U.S. is doing in Afghanistan. And the command that I worked for went away. I got picked up on an advisor team to an Afghan staff, a 2-star, or what we in the U.S. military call a 2-star command. The commander of this element was a 2-star general in the Afghan forces, and I was an advisor to one of his staff members who's what we'd call a 1-star general. Now, for the purposes of today, I am not going to talk about, or I'm not going to name any names. I want to keep them as safe as possible because they may or may not be safe in Afghanistan. All of my military officers that I worked with are still, to my knowledge, in Afghanistan, and it may not be safe for them if I talk about them. So I'm not going to list them. Just know that I am always here. I have an ear. I love hearing from them. So, I will not mention any names just for their safety, and they know I'm here and I care. Now, what was my job? Well, I was an advisor to, like I said, a 1-star general and all of his colonels, and he had about 12 colonels, what we call a full bird colonel, that worked on his staff, and I was his advisor. If he's looking for how to do operations, if he wants to, how to write orders, how to coordinate with other staffs, they look to me for help. I was there, when I got there, there was someone in the job already. He was a British lieutenant colonel. He was only in the general's office or in his building where his staff worked maybe twice a week for 1 to 2 hours each time. So he wasn't there a lot. And that's really because, and I believe, General had not much respect because of his training. And I'll talk more about this later, but first off, he's British. Afghans, after something we'll talk about, aren't real big on the British, and he trained in Pakistan, and Afghans aren't real big on Pakistan. So, he wasn't allowed in. I get there, and I have one of my first meetings with the general, and it's just him, myself, and the interpreter's there in his office, and we're having some chai, which is just the Dari word for tea. So if you're having chai tea, you're saying tea. Just call it chai or call it tea, please. Um, but it's just we're just having some chai and we're talking, and I'd say, sir, I know where all the problems stem from on why there's issues today in Afghanistan. And he turns to me and he's like, okay, explain to me, young major, where's the problems at? Where did this all start from in Afghanistan? And I'm like, it's quite simple, sir. It starts off in the 1800s when the British owned India. They've got the whole British India, which includes present-day India and present-day Pakistan. That's all and the British are seeing what the Russians are doing, and they're moving south, and they want a buffer zone between them and the Russians. And so this guy in the British Army by the name of Duran draws an arbitrary line on the map and says, this is the end of British India, and this is something called Afghanistan. And in the process of doing so, divides the Pashto tribe and has divided the main population of that region into two different countries, with never consulting any of them, just saying, hey, this is you're Indian now, you're part of the British India, or you are part of this other thing we're calling Afghanistan. Now, as we do this, he splits this up, he's got that buffer, he writes it in, he writes as a treaty and says this is good for 100 years. In 100 years we'll re-look at it, and the line will just disappear, things will go back to normal. The problem is, before that 100 years comes, the United Nations comes in after the British leave India and create a whole new country called Pakistan. Now, the UN comes in, they take that same exact line that Duran drew and said it's supposed to expire at a certain date, and said that's now the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now Afghanistan, you're stuck with it. The Pashto tribe remains divided between the two countries. It's like, that's the first issue, that's the first step on how we get to where we're at today. General Sadiq looks at me, he's like, yeah, okay, I see where you're coming from. You said you had two examples. What's the other reason? I'm like, it's very simple, sir. And for your background, remember we've got Cold War going on in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s about the Soviet or the communist East versus the democratic or free West. And there's a lot of domino wars going on. And then in 1970, or prior to 1979, in the 70s, the Soviets are in Afghanistan. They're in there, they're welcomed. And the culture of Afghanistan is very welcoming. We treat you as you're a guest, we're going to protect you to the death. They will feed you everything else. And when the Soviets come in and say, we want to build you roads, we want to build you highways, the Afghans are like, but of course, please be our guest, welcome to our country. We love that you're here visiting us and providing these wonderful things, but the Soviets read that completely wrong. Soviets read it altogether wrong. They took that as they want us there, they want communism, they want our lifestyle. And so in December 1979, they go in and invade the country. Absolute worst thing that they could have done. They go in, they're trying to force their way of life. They take out the democratic government that was in there. And the war now the country now goes into a civil war, or a war against the Soviets, against the invading force, and they fight this for 10 years. And then in 1989, As the Cold War is ending, the United States simply outspent the Soviet Union in military spending. Cold War's ending, we've got the wall of Berlin is falling. People are trying to break free from the Soviet Union and reform their own original countries. The Soviet Union brings the army back. We need these folks back to help maintain order back here in our own country. They pull out of Afghanistan. At that point, then where there's nobody in charge. The democratic government before, it was all killed. There's no communist government. There is no government. It becomes a lawless land where there is nobody in charge. This is when people are doing things they shouldn't do. There's murder, there's rape, there's all kinds of things that upset certain people, and some individuals like I, who had their families raped and murdered. We can't have this. They decide to take matters in their own hands, and they actually do things like form their own police force. They do their own military, and they become warlords. And this is what opens us up for terrorism and where we're at today. In addition to that, the U.S. has parts to play, but we will go into that at a different time. This leads us to when we go into war in 2003, because this is all the terrorists are coming from there, because there was no one controlling anything in the country. There was no government, so you have all the warlords. And I explain this to the general, and he sits there and he's like, "You're absolutely correct. I agree with you." From that moment on, I had free run of his headquarters. I was in his office, his personal office, at least twice a week for a couple hours every time. Just the general and myself having a conversation, talking about what's going on, talk about family, things like that. We talked about what my family's doing, what he's doing, when he's getting ready to go off to do something for medical in India, because it's a cheaper place for medical for them. And then I would spend the rest of my day with his corps planners, with his aviation planners, with his civil military operations planners, with his admin. And this all leads to the very end. When I get ready to leave, I'm not sure if I had a real impact or not. Did they really trust me and take what I take my words to heart? And as I get ready to leave, they have a farewell for me. Now, U.S. military tradition, we have hails and farewells, usually about once a month, where we briefly greet the new people that came to the unit in the last month, and we farewell those that are leaving in the next 30 days, say goodbye, give them a plaque, say thanks for being here, we appreciate everything you did while you were here, and then we go on our way. Well, they had their farewell for me, and General Sadiq, or the general, provides me with a cup. It's simple coffee cup that's got Afghan flag on the outside, inside in English, "I love Afghanistan." He gave me a scarf to give to my wife that's in the colors of the Afghan flag. He does that just one-on-one, just the two of us in his office. My interpreters were there. When I left the office, heading back to my building where my headquarters was, my interpreters are like, the general has never given anybody a gift in all the years we've interpreted for him. So that says something, that the general took time and got me a small token of his appreciation when I saw what he did to the British officer, which was absolutely nothing, and he gave them gifts. They gave him nothing. I've got a wonderful tea set that his admin department had made for me. I've got clothing. They gave me a lot of chai. They gave me little leather-bound notebooks to work. My own interpreters went out and they got me a piece of clothing that I was very appreciative. I didn't realize the significance till I got back and was talking with my instructors for the language school about what it meant. So apparently I did have some kind of an impact, and that makes me happy. And yeah, I treasure everything that they did, everything that they gave for me, and I truly do miss my interactions with them. Hopefully one day we will all get together. Their country will hopefully be safe enough that we can travel there and visit with them once more. Uh, but that's my story of being an AFPAK hand in Afghanistan, and how kind of the highlights there. Please leave comments down below if you've ever experienced a new culture. How did you use history or things to help achieve a task using their culture or knowing their culture, their language? Like, share, subscribe if you found this enjoyable, entertaining, educational, and let me know what you want to hear about next. Hope to see you in the next one. Rosa Kush, Kuda Hafez. Until the next time. Ciao.